Okay. So till now we are done with the basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the web services thing. You know how to integrate the web services and get the data from the SQL Server database, and then how to integrate your fetch data using JavaScript to your HTML views, right? So today we are going to start with a new topic, that is AngularJS. So we are going to cover the following topics. The first is MVC architecture. The AngularJS whole thing works on the basis of this architecture. So you need to learn this architecture before learning the AngularJS thing. So we learn about MVC architecture first. Then we'll come to the AngularJS basic topics like the directives, expressions, controllers, and scopes. These things are the very basic things of AngularJS that you should know before you start building the application using AngularJS. Okay. So let's come to MVC architecture first. Do you know anything about MVC architecture? Nothing, right? Okay. So MVC stands for Model, View, and Controller. So we call it Model, View, Controller architecture. What we have in our application is we have the HTML pages, we have our JavaScript code, and we have our web services and the database. Okay, we have three things. So the database and the web services side, we call it the model that contains the data. The JavaScript thing that we use to integrate between the HTML and the database thing, right? The JavaScript thing we call that code controllers, and the HTML thing where the data gets displayed and we can interact, the user can interact with the data, that part is called view. So we have three things: model, view, and controller. Okay, so this is the basic architecture that
view is the HTML and controller is the JavaScript.
Yeah, right now. Model is your web services and the SQL Server database that contains the data. Right? So this is the basic architecture. User interacts with the view, and the view interacts with the controller to get the data, and the controller interacts with your database and web services to have the data. Okay. So this architecture is clear to you? Okay. Okay. So after this, let's move on to AngularJS thing. What is AngularJS first of all? AngularJS is nothing but a JavaScript framework. You already know the basic JavaScript, right? So it's a step forward with the JavaScript thing. It's a complete set of JavaScript library that makes your application much more faster and to improve the you can say performance of your application. Okay. So first of all, how you can include the AngularJS thing in your JavaScript code? You have to use this script tag that we use to include any JavaScript file, right? So this is the basic CDN link for the AngularJS thing. This is how you include the AngularJS in your JavaScript code. Next, what AngularJS does is it basically extends some of the HTML attributes. Like we have HTML attributes, HTML tags like div, span, and HTML attributes like style attribute and class name attributes like that. The AngularJS will have its own HTML directives, and it will enhance the performance and the of your application. Okay. So AngularJS we say is perfect for single page applications. That's the advantage of AngularJS, using AngularJS. That's the basic thing about AngularJS, that why we use AngularJS. What is a single page application now? The whole of your code resides in a single page. You have just one single page, like say index.html. You'll include all your JavaScript codes and CSS code there, and you'll have some of the partial HTML pages that you will include in your that index page to change the view. If you want to show the login page, you will add that login page partial view in your index page. And then if you want to move from your login page to profile page, what will you do is you will replace that partial view from login to profile page in that one particular index.html page. You use single page to navigate through different partial elements. Okay, that's the concept of single page applications that we call SPA. Okay. And AngularJS supports two-way data binding. That's the most important advantage of AngularJS. You just have to specify a variable name that this variable holds this value and that's it. You don't have to do anything. The HTML will take the value from that variable and the JavaScript will also take the value from that variable. Two-way data binding means if you will update anything in your HTML site, say supposedly if you have an input type text control, you'll specify a variable that holds the value of that input type variable, and if you change the value of that input type variable, the value in the controller will automatically change. You don't have to do it manually like get document by ID and then you don't have to do all that using this. So AngularJS makes it much more easier to bind data through HTML elements. Okay, you good till now? You have any questions?
Two-way data binding is like we need to give a value, separate value for a variable, and if we keep the same variable in JavaScript also, so it will
Update the
update
variable.
the
Yeah. You don't have to do it manually now. If you change the value of your input type text control, if you type something else in that particular box, it will change the value automatically with that variable in your controller as well.
So we have to give the script tag in the HTML page.
Yeah, the index, the single page application we are talking about, you will use the script tag only in the index.html page. You don't have to include everything in all the pages like you're doing till now. Okay? So single page application, you just have to include your code in one page. Okay, let's move on. So next is what we call is AngularJS directives. That's the first basic step towards AngularJS application. Let me just show you first how an AngularJS application looks like. It's the basic HTML application. Same thing, you'll use the HTML tag, then the script tag I've included here, the AngularJS, and then in the body you'll have a div that says ng app directive. This is the AngularJS directive called ng app. All AngularJS directives are prefixed by the keyword ng. Okay, so ng app means it's an AngularJS directive, and ng app binds this whole application to the my app directive. Okay, this ng app directive specifies this is the container of the AngularJS application. This div is the container of the AngularJS application. This is the basic structure of an AngularJS application. So let's come to other directives. We similar to ng app directive, we have two more directives, that is ng model and ng bind. ng model directive, you specify a variable to your HTML element and it will bind the data to that particular variable. Okay, you'll come to know with an example, but these are the three most important AngularJS directives that we use most often. And there are a set of other directives also like ng init, and there are a number of directives that you can use. You can just.
So this is for the two-way binding.
Yeah, exactly. So let's come to an example using these directives. Okay, so directives here. We have specified the ng app directive here. That means our AngularJS application resides in this particular div. The whole of this is the main container of the AngularJS application. Okay, what we are doing inside this is I've taken an input type text field and said the ng model directive of this input type field is name. Okay, so whatever value I will type in this input type text, it will be binded to this variable called name. The name variable has the value whatever I'll type in this input type text. Okay, the next thing what I'm doing is I have an h1 control where I'm displaying the value typed in this input type text. So what will I do is I type welcome here, and in the span tag I've used the ng bind directive. It will bind the same variable name that I've used here to this span tag. Whatever I'll type in this input type text field, it will be displayed here. You don't have to add any JavaScript code, anything like get document by ID and then assign the value to this particular span. You don't have to do anything at all. This is the only code that will be required to bind the values. So let's see how it works. This is my AngularJS post application page. that uses the AngularJS directives. I have this input type text field. Whatever I'll type here, so this is my AngularJS application page. Whatever I'll type here, like say I'll type my name, it will be automatically populated with my name. These two fields are binded together using ng model and ng bind directives, AngularJS directives. Okay, the code becomes easier. You don't have to refresh the page. You don't have to get the element by ID in your JavaScript and then assign the values. Just use a variable name, both the places, and it will be all good. Okay. So this was about AngularJS directives. Now let's come to AngularJS expressions. Okay. Similar to AngularJS directive, we have something called AngularJS expressions. You just use these two curly braces and write the variable name inside these curly braces, and it will be displayed there. You don't have to use the ng bind thing always. Okay. Instead of ng bind, just use the curly braces and the variable name. Like this, we are doing here in expressions. The ng init, I was talking about ng init directive also. It will initialize the values here. I have initialized a and b. Variable a is 10 and b is 20. And what I am doing here is displaying sum of a and b in the AngularJS expression. I can put some expression, calculate some value, or I can directly give the variable name here. Whatever I want to display. So I say it's a plus b. It will calculate the value for me and then it gets displayed there. Let's see. Expressions. Let's say 30. 10 and 20 I have initialized. If I change the value here, let's say I make it 20, it will be automatically updated here. So 40. If I don't want to give the expression here, I can just give any variable name here and it will be displayed. Say I want to display the value of a. What it will do is it will display the value of a without calculating anything. Okay. So one more example we can take is let's say this one. I have two input types, first name and last name. I am using ng model to bind the variable name first name to this field and variable last name to this field. And then what I am using is I am using AngularJS expression to display the first name and last name together. Okay. So I'll type my name here, say Fatma, and last name, it will be displayed here. I'm using first name plus last name to display the value here.
So if I have suppose I have a login page and it has a username and password, right? So and once I log in, it again opens into the login screen, like a home page or something. So I can bind them the both HTML pages.
I didn't get your question clearly.
Like once I get the username and password, and once I click the login button, it logins into a welcome screen, right?
Yeah, right.
So I can use after welcome screen. I can use the username as suppose if I get the username and password as Pratyusha and something, and once I enter into the home screen, I can use that username here. Welcome Pratyusha.
Yeah, you have to use the scopes for it. We'll come to it later.
Okay.
You can use the scope and set the variable in root scope of the application, and then you can use it in some other page. Okay. So you're clear about expressions and ng bind directive, both the cases, right? You can use the both ways now. Okay. So this was about AngularJS directives, expressions, and next thing what we are going to learn is AngularJS controllers. How do you create controllers? Like we used to have separate JavaScript files, right? Till now for HTML. Similar way, we'll create the AngularJS controllers in JavaScript file. Okay. Controllers, basically what they do is they control the data. You get the data from your web service and they'll control how you get how the data gets displayed and how you manage the data using your HTML thing. Okay, this is what the job of a controller. Now using the Angular controller is a different thing. You have to use the ng controller directive that specifies an AngularJS controller. Okay, and then let's see with an example the AngularJS controller shell. Yes. Same thing, I have the first name and last name input type controls, and I have binded the ng model thing here. And what I'm doing is I'm displaying the first name and last name thing in an AngularJS expression using curly braces. Same thing I'm doing here, right? But the difference is I'm not initializing the value here. I'm not using the ng init thing here. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm creating a controller. Ng controller says my controller. Okay, how it works in the JavaScript is you have to create the AngularJS container application first. So app is you have to give the ID here, my app thing. Okay, this is the my app. You have created an AngularJS module like this. This is the basic sentence. Okay, now using this variable, you have to create different controllers for your different pages. I am creating app.controller for my this page called my controller, ng controller as my controller. So app.controller my controller, and it's a function that has a dollar scope variable. This scope variable is valid for only particular of this particular controller. Whatever you will set the value in this particular scope, you can use it here in this controller. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm setting $scope.first name as Satna and $scope.last name as Mata. I'm setting these values in my controller. Okay. So let's see the HTML page. This is how my HTML page looks. See, I have not entered any values in the input type control, but it's already taking the first name and last name values here from my controller. Right? If I change it here, it will update the bottom thing as well. Okay? I can change it here, but I am specifying the default value in my controller here. Yeah, I just did it, right? We have specified Pratyusha here, and I remove its last name. It will say welcome Pratyusha. It's updating here right now. Okay. Instead of ng init directive, I'm using the Angular controller now. This is the very basic explanation. You use the controller for a lot of more things.
Yeah, just like the scope is used for logging in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So the first name and last name we were using were AngularJS variables, scope variables. Now you can have some functions as well in your AngularJS scope, controller scope. Okay. So let's see how the function works. This full name is a function that I'm creating in my AngularJS controller scope. And what it is doing is it's returning the scope.first name and the scope.last name to my AngularJS code. So if I use this thing, it will do the same thing. And instead of writing the variable names here, I'm using the function to return the value of full name here. Okay. So what it's gonna do is you'll get the same thing twice, but the first thing is coming from the variable names and the second thing is coming from the function call. The same thing you can achieve both ways. Okay. You are going to write all the code in your controllers. When you want to call the web service, you're going to call the Ajax call, put the Ajax call and the result in your web service. When you'll get the result from your web service, you'll assign the data that you'll get from the web service to your scope variable so that it populates the HTML screen. Okay. Now let's say how do I work with arrays in AngularJS? I have let's say I have an array of names. I have 4 names in my array and I want it to get displayed as a list. Okay, what I will do is I will create a list type control in HTML, that is UL, right? And I will create li elements saying ng repeat director. How many times it should repeat? The number of times, the length of the array, right? So name in names. I have the names variable here. So I'll say name in names. Every name I want to get it displayed in an li tag. So this li tag will be repeated the number of times it will get the name in array. Okay. So let's see how it works. It's repeating the number of times you have the length of the array. You don't have to loop around in your JavaScript code saying just go to 0 to length of the loop and then print the names in the array. Just have to specify an ng repeat director and it will be all done for you. Okay. So this is about AngularJS controller. Do you have any questions for this? Okay, next we are moving on with AngularJS scope. The scope is the binding part between the HTML, that is the view, and the JavaScript that we have to control. Okay, the scope we bind using variables and function. We bind the data using the AngularJS scope. Okay, the scope is an object with the available properties and methods, that the variable names, and the functions you create inside the scope variable. Okay, the scope is available for both the view and the controller. You can use it on your HTML as well and the JavaScript also. Okay, and there is one more thing called root scope, that you can this particular scope that we are using is valid for one particular controller. Okay, this scope variable will be available only for this particular HTML page. What if you want to use one variable throughout your HTML application, AngularJS application, for all the pages? Then a similar thing like scope, we have a thing called root scope. You set the variable in the root scope and then you can use it in any controller. Okay, it's the same thing like with the root thing.
So you can use the example which you showed with the root.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the root scope thing, you have to include this AngularJS route JavaScript code in your application. This is the JavaScript library for routing. We will come to know more about routing in maybe next section. So I have included this AngularJS route here, and then in my application I specify the dependency of AngularJS routing here. Then I'm using the root scope in my controller and setting the value of source name using root scope instead of scope variable. Okay. Now I can use this root scope dot first name variable in any of my controllers, in any page, and it will give me the value there. Okay. So let's see. It says Katusha that I've set using the root scope instead of scope variable. Okay. I can use the same root scope variable in multiple controllers. Okay. It's clear till here. Okay. There are some basic references. AngularJS, you have the AngularJS.org link there. You have the development docs. You can just go through it and learn as much as you can about AngularJS. And of course, the W3 links and the tutorials points also have some of the things. But this AngularJS.org has the best guide to AngularJS. Okay, just go through it and learn about it as much as you can. Okay, so this was all about AngularJS.